Okay, everybody. Next up is a panel session, which is going to be chaired by John Cartwright, who's currently UCISA Executive Chair, and he's going to introduce the panel to us.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is the first time I think we've used a panel session in this event, so we're breaking new ground, and I think it's down to yourselves really to help us make this as a valuable a session as we possibly can for the people in the room and also for our panel. I'd like to introduce the panel to you first and start with Dr. Phil Rains, Director of Learning and Research Information Services at the Manchester Metropolitan University. Phil has over 30 years' experience in the provision and support of IT and learning services within higher and further education. He's currently the Director of LRIS, Phil?
Yes.
At MMU, with overall responsibility for library services, IT services, learning and research technologies and business improvement. So welcome, Phil. At the far end of the table, Rhys Davies, IT Director from the University of Leeds, innovative strategist who delivers transformational IT and industry-leading solutions, experienced across several sectors including retail, gaming and now higher education. Rhys is currently developing a transformational IT optimisation programme aimed at driving efficiencies, effectiveness and collaboration at the University of Leeds. Welcome, Rhys. Sandra Whittleston, our Senior Lecturer in IT Service Management at the University of Northampton. Sandra is a Senior Lecturer in IT Service Management at the University of Northampton and a member of industry bodies, namely ITSMF UK and BSI Panel 60. She has worked in education for most of her career, which includes general management and quality and projects with IT services. Welcome to Sandra. And Barclay Ray, an independent IT service management consultant. Barclay is experienced ITSM leader who has worked on approximately 500 projects over the last 25 years and is well known as a speaker and commentator on all things IT service management. Barclay delivers strategic consultancy and mentoring as well as media and analyst services to the ITSM industry. Barclay created ITSM Goodness, a set of practical steps and guidelines for success. Welcome, Barclay. And finally, Coyote Damali, Vice President of Cheshire Student Union at the Manchester Metropolitan University. Graduating in 2013 with a first-class honours degree in Psychology of Sport and Exercise, Coyote is now Vice President Cheshire at MMU Students' Union. This also makes him Deputy President as well as a Governor at MMU, and he's an elected trustee at the National Union of Students. So welcome to all of our panel members. The questions today are aimed around the theme of the conference, i.e. supporting the business. And one of the areas of great importance in supporting the business is really understanding and building relationships with your customer group, your user groups. And I'd like to open with a question initially to Rhys in terms of what does a successful relationship look like to you and how would you measure it?
Right. Hello everybody. Thanks for the question, John. To me, it's quite simple really. A successful relationship is one that you want to continue out of choice, and that works from both sides of the relationship. Typically, in order to do that, it needs to be based on trust and mutual benefits and respect. And it's not always an easy relationship because sometimes, when you get the difficult activities to deliver, you've got to be able to work together to achieve those. So it's not always plain sailing. So, as I say, the main measure for me in terms of what a successful relationship looks like is that one that you choose to continue with over the long term. In terms of the measures, I suppose the most important one is really quite a soft measure, which is the extent to which you want to continue with that relationship out of choice. We've all got many relationships, I'm sure, with various suppliers and various users where you have to continue because there's no other alternative. That's not a great relationship. The ones that really work well are the ones where you have options, but you choose to work together, and ideally you can build on successes that you've had together, and you develop that relationship where you can trust and move things forward. So that's it from me, I think.
Perhaps maybe a different context. Coyote, from your perspective, what would you see as being a strong relationship or successful relationship, and how would you measure it?
For me personally, talking from a student's experience, I think that one of the main things to recognise in the relationship is the fact that as IT providers, you need to understand that the knowledge that you have might not be the same knowledge that the students do have. So from my personal experience, when talking to people who do have more knowledge than me, if someone's talking down to you, that's almost breaking down the relationship. So it's almost like understanding the person you're talking to and literally just putting that at a level for them to understand as well. So once you have that kind of mutual relationship, that mutual agreement, you can almost have a great service, I think, personally.
Thank you. Any other members of the panel like to add comment? Barclay, maybe?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things in terms of the traditional IT organisation relationship. One is that the relationship isn't just based on SLAs. It's the relationship trumps SLAs, if you like. So it allows you to have some flexibility above and beyond what is just simply set out and agreed as if it were a contract. The other side would be if you imagined a supplier coming in, talking to the top of the organisation and asking the question, what's your IT like? The good relationship would be when the response is, well, actually, we have some issues with them, but we think they're value for money, we get on, we understand, they understand us, as opposed to the reaction from the top of an organisation that says, don't talk to me about IT. Why does it take 6 weeks to get a PC? We can never get through to the service desk. They always say no. And I think that's the sort of tangible two ends of the scale in terms of the relationship that's working, where it's tough but it's solid, and one which is dysfunctional.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, just a comment from me, which is really, I think it's about partnership as well. We quite like the use of the word customer, but actually when we're talking particularly with our other staff, it is a partnership and it's about building trust. You know that some things will go wrong, and you've got to build that trust up in advance that they'll actually trust you to get them right a bit later on. So it really is that relationship. I often like to think about it as a family as well. My colleagues know that I tend to drive scribes and services I've got as a set of families, and families get together a lot of the time, but they also fall apart a lot of the time. You really need to think about that, managing that relationship, just like you might have to manage the relationship with the other family members.
Sandra?
Yeah, I'd like to echo what Reece and has said. It's about this idea of trust and building that relationship over time. It is very important. And I know from my experiences of working with ITSM in the university IT organisation, we were trying to show by our methods that we were trustworthy and that we were able to act as exemplars for the rest of the university. One of the points I would raise, from my experience, is that IT can do its job. IT can do a good job, and I've worked with some great colleagues on that one. I'm very, very honoured to have done that in IT services. But it depends upon the other service units having a similar trust relationship with you. Everyone's each other's customers. So it's about the other service units collaborating and providing that whole service culture across the organisation. Very often in academia we have very silo-based departments. I'm now on the other side, so to speak. I've jumped ship from services and gone over to the dark side. So I see things from a different perspective. It's very interesting to see the effect that has on my job as an academic now. So it is about building the trust around the organisation and keeping that focus. You've got to keep that focus of what you want to achieve.
Thank you. It's interesting, over the past 5 years, when I first came into the sector, I used the word customer all the time, because in my previous job, that had been rammed down our throats constantly as they were focused on customer. I've seen a shift in the sector since I've been in the sector, where the word customer is used more and more now and accepted as that we have got a customer-supplier relationship in some cases. But the dynamic that exists from an IT central services type team is that some of our customers are our colleagues and also our suppliers at the same time. So there's a very strange dynamic that exists. And I think the comments made here, the trust issue, is very, very important, irrespective of which side of that relationship you're actually sitting on. So we as IT providers will sit on both sides of that relationship. I'd like to open the question now to the floor. Is anybody like to pose a question to the panel, either to the panel generally or to a specific person? If you could put your hand up, we've got a microphone for you to pose your question.
My name is Derek Edmonds. I'm from University of Salford, Associate Director for Customer Service. Question is to Sandra. I did a presentation yesterday to a French study group who were visiting the university, and I just did an overview of IT services. They were quite surprised with the figure that I brought out, which was 98% of our services actually go to the professional service teams. And with you being in the academia side,
Yes.
can you really answer why only 2% of our services are recognised that go to the academics? And I know core services basically are the true sort of service to the academics.
Yes.
And we have uptimes of over 95%, and there's some things that we can't control, like Trinity, which is a third-party product, which is always failing. But apart from that, can you answer that question around that 2% figure?
I don't know the answer to that, to be honest with you. I think I do feel that we have to make inroads into that. I mean, the academic community can seem to be very dysfunctional as a community itself, can't it? We've got individual departments doing individual things, and at the front line of teaching, that's our prime job, is to now teach. So all that service side is important to us, and I think coming from the services myself, I have tried to be a proponent of that as a lecturer. So I'm not really sure I have the answer to your question, except that we have to overcome these difficulties and try to sell the messages a lot more in professionalism across the board. Does that help, or not really?
Well, I'm sure it will vary, and if you ask everyone in the room, I'm sure they probably don't know what the percentage is, but I'm sure they make up an appropriate figure. I suppose within MMU, I'm quite fortunate in that I actually do have quite a wide range of services, so I have a library as well. But in response to your comment, one of the things that we're doing at the moment is developing a sort of dashboard, if you like, for our academic staff, which is providing them information about the health of their courses, the engagement of their students, and so on and so forth. And that absolutely is working directly with the academic staff to deliver stuff directly to them. It's a bit about this sort of disintermediarisation sort of thing. In the past, they've gone to the administrators to get them the information they want, rather than actually providing it directly to them. So that actually opens up a channel of communication between us and them to understand what they need, how we can deliver it, and then we're hoping that we'll build on top of that. The other engagement that we actually have as well is with them in terms of advising on the pedagogy associated with learning technology. So again, we have another role there where people in the service that I've got have a direct relationship. They sit with the academics, they understand what they're doing, and all of those things, I think you can then start to build more and more services on them directly to the academic staff and of course to the students as well.
Yeah, I'd love that. I love that.
Yeah.
Generally in the room, is there a similar relationship as expressed in the question across the room, or is it very different? Views?
Could I make a point there?
Yeah.
Because I think it's possible that I've seen this a number of occasions where there's two sides to it potentially. One is that the organisation and people working for it don't have enough understanding or clarity about what IT is actually delivered to them. And I think we had that discussion yesterday about service portfolio and service catalogue. Very often it just really helps to define services, because it makes it clear to the organisation, both internally in IT and beyond, what it actually is that you do. And so there's probably a lot of, there's maybe some lack of clarity there about what is actually delivered. The other side, I think, is the value of actually going and asking and and sometimes IT organisations are surprised at the different view that their customers, and I won't use that word, have of what is being delivered by them. And so, I don't know the detail in your organisation, but I think we might always be a little bit surprised if we start to do that discovery and actually get to realise that not only what we're delivering is maybe clearly understood, but the perception of it could be completely different to what we are actually thinking that we're delivering. So the sort of definition of services that was mentioned earlier, I think, is absolutely key.
Reece?
My question is really one back for you, Derek. Organisationally, are you talking about IT delivered from the centre and then IT being, other elements of IT being delivered by academics for themselves, in terms of they've just got lots of people out there, but you've got no visibility of them?
It was the centralised IT. I think every university will have other activities which we wouldn't involve in.
Okay.
You know, when we talk about the asset management system or the other, which is used by our media,
Right.
there are services there that are not.
Would you have a view as to how much or how big that was compared to the central services that you're providing? Is that just a couple of people, or is it sort of half or 20%? It's a hard call because these people are very difficult to identify in a lot of cases because they have multiple skills.
I can't really answer that, Reece.
Right.
I do know that we provide. We've got a large portfolio. It's almost 50 projects per year, but we only have a small department that deliver that. So it's probably one of the reasons why we can't be as adventurous as we would want to be with the academia. It's food for thought what I've listened to from the panel. So thank you.
Just on that point, because one of the challenges we had at the University of Leeds, and I may well touch on that later on, is that if you've got lots of people out in the faculties and the research functions doing IT that are perceived to be part of the IT function, and you've got no control or support that you can provide for them, that's a really difficult place to be, because people are thinking that they're consuming a service from IT, but they're not. And so, you're almost being... your successes are not really under your control if these people are going off and doing things without your support, your engagement, your training, and the use of your standards. So if you've got that type of organisation, it's quite difficult to deliver a consistent service.
And that's a dilemma that we all face, I think, and in the 5 years I've been around, I've seen it circle around in institutions, centralising, decentralising, consolidating, deconsolidating. So I think it's something that will go on forever. It's a dance that we'll be dancing for many years to come. Can I now move on to another... Anybody else in the audience like to pose a question to the board? Thank you.
James Harty from Trinity College Dublin, Desktop Support Services Team Leader. I just have a question about this topic of relationships, particularly on the student side, and I welcome on the panel. It's very interesting. There's a good selection of people there, particularly an academic and a student being on the panel is actually very positive. I think it was well thought out, the people who were selected. Particularly to Coyote. Coyote, in regard to the relationship between, say, student union, students and an IT department. Just coming from a Trinity College perspective, I always find that it's a difficult relationship in regard to the change of personnel every few years with a student union. Now, maybe different in Manchester, but how do you find communicating the students' needs to an IT department, where a lot of times it can be very individual to whoever gets elected as a student rep? How do you get all the needs of students out there? Is it via surveys and communicate that back to an IT department? That's the first question. And the second question is, how do you build relationships? What type of mechanisms do you use to build a successful relationship with an IT department? Because I sometimes get a feeling that students, in the bigger scheme of things, in a university of academics, admin departments and students, the students are kind of seen as the poor relation. I don't think that should be, and maybe it's not, but I'm not saying necessarily that's even in Trinity, but I think sometimes people view students as they're so busy with their studies that you don't always get the feeling basically that they get as much of their message across as they should. So that would be my two questions.
So can you say that second question again?
Yeah. The second question is, what mechanisms, say even in your own experience in Manchester, do you use to build your relationship with an IT department? Like, I'm just thinking of an example would be user groups and student representatives getting their message across, but what mechanisms do you use? Is there more than just user groups?
Mm-hmm. Okay. I mean, firstly, thank you for recognising me representing students in the panel. I'm glad I could add that input from my standpoint. But in terms of how can we communicate students' needs, I think it's important firstly to recognise that as students, most of them typically 18 to 21. I mean, at the end of the day, we're the most socially connected generation in the history of the planet. You know, they say, I've heard a quote saying once that, you know, we have the ability to talk to 6 different people in 6 different countries in under 6 seconds using our 2 thumbs touching a glass screen. You know what I'm saying? So students have, I think, a massive demand when it does come to IT. So when we do have things such as Turnitin, we had a period where Turnitin was down. And for those who don't know, this is where, you know, you submit your assignment online and it kind of checks it for plagiarism. So when that went down, I mean, students can be quite vocal. It's not a case of having to worry as such for students to communicate their needs. If they're unhappy with something, I can guarantee you're going to find out. You know, especially if it's use things like Twitter, Facebook, etc. But coming from my perspective, what I try to do is to try and communicate students' needs to IT departments is that it's always going back to relationships. I always try to make sure I have a great relationship with the students, and as well as a great relationship with the IT head of IT, the different guys who run the IT program. But one thing we do have at MMU is that we have something called IT Rovers, where these are actually students who have been paid by the IT department, you know, to go out to different places like the library or where different IT rooms to have a look to assess how everything's going on there. And they have a close relationship with the guys who run the IT. But for myself personally, it's just literally talking to students and finding out exactly how they are, what they need, and just having that good relationship with the people and heads of the IT department. And yeah, does that kind of answer the question a little bit?
Could I?
Yeah.
Could I maybe push the question to the rest of the panel? What systems do you have in place for engaging with the students to understand their IT needs? Are they formal or informal? Maybe Phil? Reece?
I'd add on the comments. Yeah, I mean, a combination. So there's a lot of informal contact, and also the question is as well is actually, is a relationship with the Students' Union or with the students? The answer, of course, is both. I think some of the sort of formal mechanisms that we have are things like the course reps. Each of the course reps every so often have student shout-outs, which basically they can raise anything that they like. So we'll be part of that. Sometimes it might be one of my library colleagues, sometimes it might be an IT colleague, but we'll bring those sorts of things back. Again, a Students' Union 3 times a year produce a student voice report. So again, the sorts of things that they're actually finding out come in those reports. If they're IT or library issues, we'll pick those sorts of things up. There was something else that I was thinking about which has gone out of my mind as well. But I think it's that combination of informal contacts or semi-formal contact like the IT roamers and the formal contacts around the structures in the university. I suppose one other thing that we do have as well is we have an online unit student satisfaction questionnaire which actually happens twice a year, and it's very simple. There's 2 quantitative questions and 2 qualitative questions, and we analyse those, so we'll actually be able to go in and say, what were the students saying about IT or library or this or that or the other. And then, as you rightly say, we spend a lot of time keeping an eye on what's actually happening with Twitter and actually responding those. So as you say, when we had the problem, as a lot of you did with Turnitin, we really put a lot of effort into explaining what we were doing or what we couldn't do and so on. So, and by and large, the students are actually very understanding if you actually keep that communication going.
I think the opportunity to use Twitter and the social networks came out very strongly in yesterday's session with Carolyn, and perhaps it's something that we as institutions in the sector might want to think about, if we're not already using them, to how we become more proactive with the Twitter feeds rather than reactive to the Twitter feeds. Could I maybe just show of hands in the room, does anybody have formal processes in place for engaging with their students? Quite a small number. And informal processes? So a lot more. So an area
I think that's a big thing. I mean, I don't know how many people here are from an educational institution, but I mean, I'm glad the fact that we've got kind of like a double team power coming from MMU. But yes, literally, it's that thing, because some students don't necessarily know how to put across in a formal setting. So like we said, so when we have these sort of student staff forums, it's literally a chance for students to get off anything on their chest, and not only to do with IT, but literally any aspect of their university experience. And I think some of the massive changes that we've had over MMU have actually come from these kind of informal briefings. So I think it's a powerful way to find out exactly what students think personally.
I do. I think part of this issue as well for students, if you don't mind me saying, is the fact that they are sometimes overawed by the academic procedures that they're in, and very often we find in course committees they're afraid to speak about things, or they may not be representing their fellow students. So it is, someone like yourself is a good advocate for that. But the same applies as well to the academic staff. We put things forward, we as you were saying in your question originally, we try to have this engagement. And sometimes there's a mismatch between what is discussed at these committees, because they are the formal mechanisms within our institution, and what actually goes forward. And I, coming from the services side, I know it's not quite as easy as that, because IT has its constraints, doesn't it? It has its constraints, and therefore it's not always easy to answer all those questions in the immediate term. But I think communicating with the academic staff and the students is a way to explain why things might not be happening, rather than just letting things fall into an abyss. And that is the worst thing that can happen, because everyone gets disengaged with the whole thing.
I think it's like the marketing mix that you hear about. There's no one single, only one means of communication or contact. But like we're talking about the SDI stands this morning, that says both short-term and long-term customer satisfaction surveys, lots of other different means of doing it. I think if we're taking the family analogy further as well, I don't have an SLA with my wife.
Maybe you should.
Actually,
Be sure about it.
maybe she's got.
Can we ask the audience who has got a SLA with them?
A lot of the nature of communication in a relationship is just based on proximity and knowing what's going on. And I think that's a really important point to make, is to get out. There's a guy I know in the States who is an IT support manager, and he gave up his desk about a year ago. And all he does is he works round on the campus. He's got he's making a little bit of a point about being mobile, but he just goes out there and he spends his time with people, seeing what they're doing, how they're using the technology, and learning from that and picking up on that. And that's how we get closer to understand really what people think of us, as well as and what they're doing with their technology, as well as just having infrastructure, application, blah blah blah, all that kind of stuff.
And there's lots of talk about things like social media, offering portals into feedback, isn't there? So how many of you in your institutions actually use social media as a way to get information off the ground, whether it be academic stakeholders or students? And what happens to it? Who would one of you like to give an example of how that actually works? Sally?
Sally.
So we actually have an active Twitter account that we use for IT services, and it's not just about pushing out information about service outages, but it's quite proactive. So we have a comms roadmap, and we actually have specifics. So for start of term, what the students need to know at the start of term, and we plan that right throughout the year. And we do accept sort of queries and feedback on Twitter as well. And as well as doing that, we do some sort of social media monitoring around sort of key areas. So during start of term, during things like online module enrolment, we're actually monitoring hashtags and looking out, just to kind of see what the students are saying about our services, and just as a kind of temperature gauge, really, not as a sort of we're going to reply to every individual student, but just to get a general feel and a general flavour of what students think about our services, and that's working really well. We did have a Facebook page a few years ago, but it was withdrawn because at the time it wasn't really well used, and feedback from students said they didn't really want us on Facebook. But I think the landscape of Facebook has changed considerably, and that's something that we're going to use again. And we also have had student bloggers as well, so we've actually offered students the opportunity to blog about IT services, and it's been very open. They can say whatever they want, but that's been quite interesting in just seeing what students are kind of blogging about when it comes to IT as well.
I think with the new fees and our students becoming more like customers, I think we really do have to think about how we engage with them. The traditional approach of being the IT department in an office somewhere on the campus, I think no longer can exist, and we really do need to be to be out there with our students, with our staff, with the professional services colleagues that we work with, finding out how they are using our technology. I think there's a huge amount we can learn from our student body, from our staff body, as to how we can deliver better services for them. You had a point to raise here.
Yeah, I was just going to say at the University of Bath, one of the things that we did recently was involve our SU presidents on our recruitment panel for our service desk manager. So actually really actively involving them in the recruitment decision and working with them.
Thank you.
How does that influence things going forward from the, you're collecting the data at the operational level, aren't you, through service desk and through these meetings at that level? How does that influence your strategy?
Well, we're not as rigorous as we can be, and actually some of the takeaways from here about some of the more formal mechanisms are really interesting. But we do surveys. We've obviously we've got the NSS, we've got library surveys, a lot of our IT is based in the library. So we do try to feed that into our purchasing decisions and the decisions around how we offer the services to students.
I have a comment here, and then there's one over there, I think.
Just a short comment. We have focus groups at the University of St Andrews, so our business relationship manager and our CIO meet with them throughout the year. But the biggest thing for us is our metrics from our front desk. We look at them and we analyse them, and for example, at the beginning of the term, the new intake, the biggest thing for them is getting connected to Eduroam. So we analyse these figures and we move the service desk into the residences, and we have a meet and greet service for the students. They don't have to come and find us. We go and find them, and we can give them additional information about St Andrews as well. But I think that's your biggest thing, is your biggest key, is your front desk service. That's the students telling you exactly what they want, what they're having issues with.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Well, I think one more comment here before we move on to another question.
Yeah, Mark Jacko, Open University. Quite a lot of conversation about students. Does the panel have any views in terms of any specific difference in terms of building relationships with staff and students as opposed to the things that are common between both?
Reece, would you want to comment on that?
Yes. It is different, especially when you start to try and support research, where you've got, I think, a culture of individuals who are fantastic specialists in their particular areas, who generally don't necessarily like to ask for help and might think that they know best in a number of areas. And it's quite interesting because if they're going to be a PI on a major research project, they're the guys who are going to be held to account, and they typically don't like necessarily to let go of some of those responsibilities to organisations or parts of organisations that might not have supported them particularly well in the past. So one of the challenges that you've got, it goes back to what we said right at the start, is how do you develop trust with those guys who might be a little bit sceptical and a little bit challenging because of past relationships. So, that's sort of the problem statement. What we've tried to do at the University of Leeds is to try and understand what the researchers are wanting to do, and then help them in their submissions, so that if you can help them understand what they're trying to do and how IT might be able to help them without telling them what the answer is, then if they're successful, they're sort of a bit more predisposed to say, well, okay, I've now got the money, how can you help me deliver what it is that we talked about previously? And if you take that a step further, you can actually help them craft grants or bids that are going to be more successful than some of those which may come from other institutions, where the IT element of a research-intensive bid hasn't been as thought through as that from other institutions. So if you start that dialogue, and then you start that trust, and then start to deliver on it, I think you can start to make some inroads. Because they do want help, but frequently they're just not sure how to ask for it. And we've not really been able to understand how to give them the support that they need, because typically you've got to do something that's a little bit more bespoke, a little bit less universal, a little bit less commodity type service, and that's high touch. But if you're a research intensive university, that's really sort of what you've got to try and do. So that would be sort of the research engagement. With the academics, you've sort of got this other type of challenge in terms of when they're trying to engage with students. There's all this new stuff out there. These new bring your own devices, all sorts of new products that are available. And those are much more sort of consumer focused. So there's lots of people who think that they can do stuff there. And again, you've got to try and, I think in that instance, understand what they're trying to do, and then to try and get some common views to what's really required across the institution, rather than across a lot of local areas. To start to say, well, you know, if we've got 15 different groups all wanting to do iPad trials, is there some value in creating some sort of common service to support those groups? Or if you've got 6 doing iPad trials, 7 doing, you know, Android things, is there things that we can do to try and help them? So it's a bit more of an open, a bit more of a questioning, and just trying to be out there. So it's all again about trying to understand and communicate. And it goes back to some of the things that have been talked about earlier about relationship management. You know, you've got to be there at the start to help proffer your help.
I think Rhys makes a very important point there. Whose responsibility is it to create and develop that relationship? Should we wait until someone comes knock on our door, or should we actually be out there being proactive, creating those relationships and finding out whether we can engage? Barclay, maybe if you're going to say something on that from the context of other industries you're engaged with.
Yeah, and I'm just going to make that point exactly, that is what is slowly happening. I think the university environment is an interesting one, because it has, and it is now particularly forcing the need for that kind of multi-level engagement. And I suppose it's been one of the downsides of the sort of process model that we've had over the last 10-15 years, you know, and a lot of projects that haven't worked with things like ITIL, because people have tried to implement it in a kind of one-size-fits-all way. You know, this is our process, this is how we do things, we're consistent, but you know, it's not actually reaching out and talking to individual stakeholders. And you see that in, you know, financial services, where, for example, you will have dealing rooms, investment rooms, that have a completely different set of business requirements in terms of support. You know, it's not, I'll phone up and we've got an 8-hour SLA, it's somebody shouting at you because you're sitting around there to swap out, you know, because they'll lose £1 million in a second. It obviously makes sense, and the one-size-fits-all doesn't work there. But what we are seeing, particularly in the last couple of years and at the moment, and this is kind of helped by the technology, is the opportunity for IT organisations to kind of reinvent themselves as being enablers, actually solution providers, above and beyond just, you know, we do projects and we turn out, you know, waterfall type project, but actually we can help you to automate what you're doing. There's lots of nice cool stuff that we can use. Even your ITSM tool sets can deliver quite a lot of functionality to other departments and help them to work better. And it all ultimately comes down to the relationship. Are you able to not just engage, but also listen and act on that listening in some way, as a way in to get to build the relationship and the trust and the respect that we're talking about? We have to find ways of doing that. And that is actually you'll see some of the vendors are actually marketing that as, you know, IT as an enabler, because you can help to automate your finance and your HR and get those things working together much more in the kind of shared service model.
Thank you, Barclay. I'm afraid on that point I'm going to have to draw the session to a close. It's now 11 o'clock. 40 minutes has flown by. Hopefully you found that useful. I'd like to thank the panel, so thank Rhys, Sandra, Phil, Kaody and Barclay for agreeing to attend and be on the panel, and thank you for your questions. I'll hand over to Stuart now for the lightning strikes.